Silvera, a former PNP MP, was initially charged with murder and using a firearm to commit a felony. However, on Monday, when the trial was to commence in the Gun Court Division of the Home Circuit Court, he admitted to guilt to manslaughter instead. That caused outrage in the public domain as people were convinced that a murder took place and believed that they ought to know the details of what led to the killing. They expressed belief that Silvera pleaded guilty to the lesser offense to avoid a life sentence. On Tuesday, prosecutors indicated they'd accept Silvera's guilty plea for manslaughter. With the prosecution taking that stance, the ball was left in Sykes's court for him to decide as trial judge if he'd accept the guilty plea. He returned on Thursday to rule that the plea was acceptable and Silvera would be sentenced on the 6th of March. The Gleaner this morning, front page of the Gleaner says, praying for justice, Melissa Silvera's relative weeps after court accepts husband's manslaughter guilty plea. A relative of Melissa Silvera was seen leaving downtown Kingston-based gun court in tears yesterday morning, saying the family is praying for justice after the court accepted a guilty plea of manslaughter from her husband, Joylan Silvera. And it gives some background. This morning, after some calls certainly made on this program yesterday based on this sort of reaction in the public, people calling for some information, a better understanding, I certainly posed some questions here yesterday and asked for the office of the DPP to issue a statement in the public interest to explain as much or as little as it can at this stage, not to satisfy people's anger, because I'm very clear that you can't even do that now, because it seems to me that people made up their minds about this case even before the trial started. So it seems to me that nothing short of a guilty plea or a conviction after trial would have satisfied a number of individuals. But we have a statement from the office of the DPP, because I had concerns yesterday as to what charges remained on the indictment, what exactly is the makeup of this plea deal, the illegal possession of firearm charge, for example, was there a plea to that? And what are we looking at in terms of sentencing? But even before we get to that stage, it is of some moment for us to understand whether this issue of provocation, if it arose based on the Crown's case as the Crown intended to place before the court. By this I mean, when someone is charged for a crime or with a crime, that happens because the police have collected various statements. There has been some forensic analysis or analyses of evidence gathered from the scene. And based on what is collected, witness statements and reports from forensic analyses and so forth, you will see in the witness statements, which the prosecutor has to disclose to the defense, you will see what is it intended that the person who gave the statement will say or is likely to say when the person goes into the witness box. And on the basis of what the person is likely to say when the person goes in the witness box, is there any evidence at all or anything that can amount to evidence of this doctrine of provocation arising on the Crown's case? The provocation is not new to the law. There was a very an awful case coming from the English jurisdiction called the Queen and Duffy from about 1949. It's a seminal case which defined the common law defense of provocation in murder cases. And in that case, the woman used a hammer and killed her husband while he was sleeping. And she argued that there was a whole history of him doing a lot of things violent against her. And as a result of that, she claimed that she was provoked. And Justice Devlin, in that case, gave what was considered, or what is considered, a classic definition of provocation, which is some act or a series of acts done or words spoken which would cause in any reasonable person, and it actually causes in the accused a sudden and temporary loss of control, rendering the accused so subject to passion as to make him or her for the moment not the master of his or her mind. So for me, if the issue did not arise on the prosecution's case, I wondered whether there was anything in the witness statements of the people the prosecution intended to call that perhaps gave some adverse or not so likable character description of the deceased, such that in cross-examination, things could arise on the defense case that would cause the issue of provocation to begin to show its head on the Crown's case. And then when the case for the prosecution is closed and the defendant gives, they usually give an unsworn statement from the doc, or in this case, because you have all to play for, if he gives sworn evidence, is it that he's going to raise some evidential burden of try to discharge this, not discharge, try to raise some evidence of something said or something done that caused him, a reasonable person, to have a sudden and temporary loss of self-control, so that in the moment he was not the master of his own mind. Based on what has now been put out by the Office of the DPP, it seems that's exactly how things were likely to unfold in the trial. So before I read the DPP's statement, what is in the public's interest? Is it in the interest of the public that in a case like this, a trial where the outcome is likely to be, at the minimum, not guilty for murder, guilty for manslaughter, or at the highest, guilty for murder, or indeed there's a possibility that by some, I don't know, some remote thing creeping in where the witnesses I don't even know how that could happen. But in all trials, there's a possibility of acquittal. I don't think that was a great possibility in this case. So it seems to me the worst outcome that could be had after trial in this matter, it would be not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. And the benefit, if any, to the public would be that in that situation, if a full trial ensued, then a full trial would serve to deprive the accused of a possibility of a reduction in the sentence. That is the only benefit. If provocation could rear its head on the case for the defense, and which it seems the prosecution could not negative, couldn't cancel out, then the best outcome after weeks and weeks of trial would be where we are now, except a person in the position of Joyland Silvera, who's put the court through a full trial. If it went to that, there would be no possibility of a reduction in the sentence. Is that in the public's interest? In other words, in a situation like this, is it in the public interest for a full trial to be had so that people can be satisfied? And I don't know satisfaction in relation to what, because it seems to me that a lot of people would not have been satisfied unless a guilty for murder was the outcome. And that is because this idea of presumption of innocence, it seems to be only an idea for some. Yeah. And we make up our minds based on what is published before matter is actually tried. Never mind that a lot of what is published can't make its way into court because it may offend all sorts of rules of evidence. Right? So the only public interest benefit based on what we now have, the only public interest benefit that could come from having a full trial in light of where things are is that there'd be a complete deprivation of an ask for a reduction in the sentence because of the court's time is actually taken up trying the matter if it had gone to full trial. Right? There are some people who are saying that there's a grand cover-up because this matter was in camera. I can't argue against that position. I don't think it is correctly held, but I've come to realize that people hold views for all different reasons. And you must bear in mind that the people who were participants in this matter, even though it took place without the glare of media, this is a senior prosecutor, a senior attorney, King's Counsel, who represents the defendant, and the Chief Justice of the country. It may carry very little weight for you overall, but it doesn't for me. And I believe I heard Counsel John Clark speaking on perhaps the need to challenge the constitutionality of the gun court, section 13, in light of the new charter. Maybe we should do that so that we don't have it. But it shouldn't be that if we have matters in camera, that an acceptance of a plea by a Chief Justice who was himself a former prosecutor of many years standing and who has demonstrated to the public in so many uncertain ways his desire for open justice. And if he accepts this, then it seems to me that the thing has properly arisen and it's not any collusion between or among the people who were in the courtroom. It has nothing to do with the hue of Joelan Silvera's skin or any political affiliation of his. But you don't need to take my word for it. But this release from the DPP has confirmed that Silvera pleaded, there were 2 counts in respect of count 1, not guilty of using firearm to commit a felony, that is murder, but guilty to using a firearm to commit a felony, that is manslaughter. He pleaded guilty to that. So the use of the firearm, guilty to that. And he's pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. So one of the questions I had to grapple with is, based on sentencing, is it going to be the charge to which he has pleaded on which he will be sentenced, or the offense on which he was charged? And it seems to me the better thinking is it is the one to which he has pleaded, which is the manslaughter, but also in relation to the firearm offense, we do have a statutory minimum of between 20 to 25 years. Mark you, the court can go below that. Of course, it can go above, but it can go below because that is what the Court of Appeal ruled in a decision recently. I don't think we've seen the written judgment yet, but it is possible.
Join us next time for Emily's Views